A good day, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Community Central. Pleased to have you here with us. And we'll be talking about exciting stuff going on in the Pulp project. Before I introduce today's guest, the usual housekeeping notes. On Blue Jeans Primetime, our platform here, there is a Q&A section. We definitely welcome you to get your questions into our speaker. And vote on the ones you want to hear the most about in terms of answers. And then we'll ask those questions at the end of the presentation and demonstration, and we'll do that in the order of most liked. So that's the housekeeping. I'm very pleased to welcome my friend and colleague, Brian Bouterse, Senior Principal Software Engineer with Red Hat. And he is going to be here today talking about Pulp and Pulp 3 specifically. Brian, welcome to Community Central.
Today we're going to be talking about Pulp 3, which is the successor code base to Pulp 2. And it's designed to be simpler and faster and support more content types. So let's go ahead and get into it. The Pulp 3 is fully open source. It's GPL v2 licensed. All of its components, and it was made by a whole bunch of great people. So I'm very proud to show off the work of a lot of folks, both developers who work on it every day and a community of active users and some contributors. Today we're going to go over kind of a little bit what is Pulp. We're going to talk about what is new with Pulp 3 versus Pulp 2. Pulp 2 had been around for about, I'd say, 8 years, probably 10 years at this point. We're going to go through some basic terminology, and then I'm going to show you some demos. We're going to see a container demo, a Python demo, Ansible demo, and an RPM demo. Pulp manages content, so each of these content types is something that Pulp can do. And the terminology is going to help us understand those demos. So what Pulp does is it can sync packages from public repositories, packages like RPM packages or container images or Python packages or Ansible collections and roles, etc. And there are more. It hosts them inside of the Pulp server, which you can install on premise, and it organizes and shares those packages in one or more repositories. And you can use Pulp to approve and promote those packages across multiple repositories. And what people typically do is hook up servers or CI to a particular repository and then put the specific set of items into it that they want. So this allows you to have a repository. When we say the word promote, what we mean is you can have a repository that has newer packages, run them with your CI or your testing servers, confident that they're good to roll out to production, for example. You can copy them and move them into the production repository, and all of your production systems are hooked up to that particular repository. You can also upload and distribute your own private packages, things that you don't want to send out into the large public repositories in the world. If that was confusing to you, here's a visual diagram of that. You can take these things on the left, which are the public artifact repositories, use various plugins for Pulp to put them in one or more repositories in Pulp, and then hook them up to various systems like your CI or your user laptops and things like that. We support a lot more content types in Pulp 3, so this is just a little eye chart or big eye chart of some of the types that we do. You're not going to see all these demoed today. There's no way I could do that. But Ansible, Debian, containers, Pulp does support full registry, which supports both Docker and Podman, and open containers, OCI. Chef support manages RPMs, Maven support for Java stuff, Python, Ruby. Pulp is pluggable, so if there's a content type here that you don't see supported, it could be added to Pulp. So with Pulp 3 was released on December 11th, 2019, and the latest release was April 30th, and that was 3.12.2, and 3.13 is coming out on that. With Pulp 3, this is what's new with Pulp 3 section. We moved from MongoDB to Postgres. MongoDB really caused a lot of challenges with Pulp 2, and Pulp has a highly relational data model, so the move to Postgres was natural for us. Also, it's faster. It's between 2 to 8 times faster in various operations based on our measurements. It also natively supports versioned repositories. Pulp 2 never had this, and so every time you make a change in Pulp 3, you get a new repository version. We're going to see a little bit of that later. And what this allows you to do is to roll back safely. So say that you rolled out a package update and it broke some things that you didn't realize, and you just wanted to go back to last Tuesday, say that you were changing packages daily. You could just roll back, and all of a sudden your clients could receive the package sets that you had at that time. So all repositories are versioned by default in Pulp 3. Also, disk storage and speed solutions. This slide's a little cryptic, but what I'm trying to tell you is that Pulp supports various syncing types. And so you can sync say I want to sync some RPM packages from a remote source, like the Red Hat CDN or some other RPM repository, like EPEL. You can have Pulp actually bring down all of the binary data when you sync, or you can tell Pulp, just bring down the metadata and only bring down the packages as clients request them. And so Pulp can act as like a pull-through cache in that case. This can save you both time and storage, because if you're not actually syncing the binary data, it happens very fast. And also you don't have to save that binary data, and you can just let your clients kind of drive what Pulp is ultimately saving. Also, storage options. We support cloud-based and really object-based storage. So this is things like S3 and Azure. Our users do actually run on these. And because we support the AWS S3 APIs, you can also use other projects like Ceph to back things like Pulp because of the API parity that Ceph provides. It's a simplified installation. We had heard that Pulp 2 is hard to install, and they were right. So we have an Ansible-based installer with a whole bunch of great docs. You can see the docs there at that website. You can also use pre-built containers. We're going to be using that to demo today. Or there's also a Pulp operator, which can fully install Pulp onto Kubernetes. But also client bindings. So driving Pulp and integrating your workflows so that Pulp will promote the packages in an automated way is easier, because you don't just have to use Bash. You can use client bindings in, for instance, Python as a language or Ruby as a language. We actually ship those two binding languages always, but you can build it in over 40 languages because of the OpenAPI schema use that we use. Also, we have better docs. There's a browsable, auto-documented OpenAPI schema. We're going to look at that later. Also, better packaging. So Pulp 2 had RPM packaging as its primary packaging method. Pulp 3, because Pulp is a Python app, is natively packaged in PyPy. It's available on PyPy, and it's designed to be Python first and repackaged as RPM second. There are also RPMs later. This makes it easier for us to run on many different distributions, which Pulp can run on many different types of operating systems. There's also a plugin API. This just makes it better, the plugin writer experience better. It makes plugins easier to write, and users don't really care that much about this, but they enjoy the benefits of having more plugins that are higher quality. So migrating to Pulp 3, this is a big task because we're switching database types, so Mongo to Postgres. But there's a really great migration plugin, and the team that's put this together is phenomenal. You can migrate Docker, RPM, Debian, and ISO content from Pulp 2 to Pulp 3, and those are the main content types that were used in Pulp 2, so that's why those are supported, even though Pulp 3 has more content types that it supports. So this is the terminology section. This terminology is going to be useful because you're going to see this terminology used over and over during the demos. So repository, what's a repository? Well, it's a versioned set of packages, for example, gems or containers, which are sometimes called content in Pulp. RPM packages, Python packages, container images, etc. So a repository holds a specific set of those. So repository version, if you have a repository, you may have version 1, version 2, version 3, each of those with a different set of packages. Say that you synced you had version 2 and you synced, you brought in some new packages, you'll get version 3. You can compare the differences between repository versions, etc. A remote. So a remote is the details about how to fetch content from another server. These are typed because the way that you fetch content from an RPM server versus from Docker Hub or Docker.io versus PyPy with Python these are all different. So the remote information is typed, and we'll see some of these later. A distribution. So a distribution is a way to expose a particular repository version's content at a particular base path. So, for example, I have this container running already, and we'll see this more later. But it's an empty page because my pulp system is empty, and later we're going to fill it up. But the idea is that you can have a path, and you can say, well, this type of content is available, and repository is available at this path, and then you can have another path food, another path bar, and you can have nested paths. Maybe one's called production, the other's called stable, etc. So a distribution takes your content live and exposes it to users. Here we go. So I believe I lost you at distributions, so I just want to make sure it's clear. So distributions let you expose content at a particular path. So I can make one repository available at my path, another repository at foo, and so forth. So that is what a distribution takes your content live and makes it available for users. A publication is creates metadata for a specific set of content. This is kind of a necessary evil. Some content types like RPM and Python require this, and other ones don't, like container and Ansible content types do not. So today's demo is going to use the single container. You can read more about it here. We ship a variety of containers, some with just a single plugin in it. You just care about that. But then we have this thing called the all-in-one container, which has kind of all the Pulp plugins in it. So we're going to use that today. We're also going to show off the Pulp CLI. The Pulp 3 CLI is really great, I think. And so we're going to use that to modify the state of Pulp in various ways. So I've already done this on my system for the sake of time, but you'll pull down this container with podman pull pulp/pulp for a specific version. You could put a colon, 3.12 on the end of this, which is what this slide should say. And you can also use Docker just as well with all this. I'm going to take a moment and check on the, go, great. So you'll need to make these settings files. You can get all this information from my presentation or from the Pulp all-in-one single container docs. So what you'll do is you'll make some files, and really what the important part is Pulp needs a few settings for the specific plugins that go here. So you'll put these settings into those files. Then you'll start it. It can be run with SE Linux. So when I run the container, I run it with this command. This mounts those directories. Like, so for instance, gives Postgres a persistent place to store its data and a persistent place to store the Pulp data, and the settings files and things like that. There's also a without SE Linux option as well. I use the SE Linux option. And then you'll need to assign it an administrator password. So in my demo, the password is password. And if you run this command, you'll be able to do that. So I've already done all that in my install. So when we switch to the terminal part of this demo, then you'll see it there. So then for installing the Pulp CLI, this is the Pulp command line interface. You can just pip install this. It's a Python app. And you can create a little config for it. It's like a 5-line config. It's nothing hard. You can Pulp config edit, and you just point it at the container. In my case, because of the way I started the container, it's hosted at 8080. And I'm using HTTP, but right now we're rolling out an HTTPS native container, and that's going to work great. And the CLI defaults to HTTPS by default, so you would really need to set this here. And you'll add a username and a password here. So this would be the admin and password. My system, I've already done that. That should be easy. So at this point, there's a whole bunch of slides after this. And if you look at the link, which we will share with you, you can see all these same commands that I'm running. But at this point, I want to switch over to the terminal. Let me first check that everything looks good, and then we'll go into the terminal. So what we're going to do here is look at some basics. So first, you can look at these logs of the Pulp container, which has a couple services. It's running Postgres. It has some workers for asynchronous work. It runs Nginx for its web server and a WSGI process for its application. But the point is that all the logs go into one place, and you can look at them with podman logs Pulp. And you can see that there's logs So if you're having trouble, that's a good thing to do. You can look at the status API with Pulp status, and this is a great way to see, is my Pulp system healthy? So by the way, this is my host system interrogating or interacting over the REST API with the container where Pulp is running. So here you can see, oh, I have 2 content apps serving content. I'm connected to my database. I have some workers that are online. That's great. And this shows you all the things that are in the single container. Ansible support, there's CircGuard for protecting content, container, we're going to see a demo of this later, Pulp Debian for Debian content, file content, Maven content, Python content, RPM content, and core. This is the heart of Pulp here. You can list tasks with this Pulp task list, and we're going to say state equals running. We don't have any tasks. We can look at state equals failed. This is much easier than it was in Pulp 2. We don't have any failed tasks. We haven't done anything yet. Cancel tasks, which this is just an example because we haven't done anything. You can delete tasks. You can delete orphans. So any content that was previously brought into Pulp, which is no longer in a repository version, in any repository version, is orphaned. It's in Pulp, it's saved, but it's not really associated with any repository version. So that's considered an orphan, and you can delete those orphans. We didn't have any orphans, but this actually just ran orphan cleanup. These are real commands, not just text outputs. This is how you kind of purge Pulp from stuff that you don't need to save anymore because it's not being used. And then you can show all the tasks with Pulp task list. We only ran 1 orphan command, so it's showing us that 1 orphan command that we just ran. And there's an interactive CLI shell. Mad props to the CLI folks for making this. When you enter this, you can click here and you can see all the different commands that the CLI can offer you, which you could call from Bash, but you can also just as easily call from the shell here. Very cool. Check that my audio is still good. All right. So next, why don't we dive into the demos? I'm going to start with the container demo. So Pulp is a full container registry. It has interoperability with Docker and Podman. It supports push, pull, tag, all the things you would expect from a full registry. It also supports RBAC, so you can have users and groups manage who can access which containers, who is allowed to perform operations like push and pull. My demo is not going to show all that today because I just want to give you a high level here, but those things are supported. So the first thing I'm going to do is also run my demo on port without HTTPS, although HTTPS is supported. So the first thing I'll do is configure my Podman to point to my registry and allow it to be insecure because this is a demo. So here's my config, which you can see I've put it here. So I've configured my Podman client. Then I'm going to log in with Podman login. And again, this TLS verify false is because of my demo environment. You should not run that in your installs. I didn't have to put in my username and password because I made sure this worked just before I went live, and it saved my credentials from that time. But normally you'd put in your username and password there. And if you had container configured with RBAC and multiple users and everything like that, you would need to put in your specific users credentials, and they would only receive the permissions they could run. So we'll look at my local images with Podman images. So I just am running a single container here. It's distributed through Docker IO. These are the only things Podman knows about locally. So we're going to tag a container locally here. And I just did that. And so I'm going to run Podman images again. And you can see that the container was tagged here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to push this container to Pulp. So it's just normal container stuff, nothing special here. Podman push. Here's the container tag. Let's go ahead and do that. So it's pushing the layers just like it would to any registry. And I'm going to take a second and verify that my sound is still going. Okay. One of the questions that we get a lot about this project is, how is this similar or different from things like Quay or Docker Hub or things like that? Quay and Pulp Container are both fully open source, and They support pretty similar workflows. So, I mean, compare the projects to see what works for you. Part of the Pulp's goal to try to make it differentiated is to make it really easy to install and very portable. So we want to make registries really easy to set up at user environments on premise. I think that's a goal that the Quay folks have as well. And so we're both trying to offer our softwares there. So now we'll pull a container from Pulp. This is normal Podman pull stuff. So we'll pull that. Oh, look, I already had the container because I just uploaded it. One of the features that I'm not going to demo, but I want to explain is that Pulp container can support pull-through caching. So you can have your clients like Podman or Docker fetch a container from Pulp, which in turn will ultimately fetch it from Docker Quay or another remote registry. And so this is one of those kind of storage and time-saving features which let you make content available to your clients through Pulp without actually having to pay the cost of it until someone goes to use it. You can also list kind of, if you're running a Pulp system and you have a lot of users and they're all pushing things, you want to understand, well, who has pushed some things lately? So this is now the Pulp CLI doing things. So this is Pulp container repository. Let's look at our list of pushes. And I only did one push in the system. And so you can see that I pushed here. I pushed a container called ASDF/Pulp, and it happened at this time. Also, you can list the distributions. This is what makes content available for downloading, so interaction with clients like Podman and Docker. And so we'll list the distributions there, and you can see that the registry path is hosted here, and portion of that's the base path is really this. So this is the namespace inside of Pulp's serving of lots of different content types that this particular image can be found. And you can browse that here. And I think this is where I lost the audio last time. This says, this is ASDF Pulp. This is our content app serving the content. And if I go into here, I don't have the access to do so because I'm not authenticated, but I just want to show that it's here. That concludes the Docker, the container demo rather. That's Pulp container. So let me just check on the audio and then we'll move on. Okay, sound is good, thank you. All right, next up, we're going to see, why don't we see the Python demo? So Python can act, Pulp Python can act as a PyPy mirror. It can allow you to upload your own packages, and you can also sync down just specific packages that you need and organize them. This is all the same kind of stuff, only now with Python. So what we're going to do is we'll create a repository with Pulp Python repository create, and we're going to name that particular repository PyPy just for fun. And you can see that this is what it created here. Then we're going to create a remote to mirror all of PyPy. We're not going to really run this because it would take a long time, but we can say we're going to say Pulp, that's the CLI, Python portion of the commands, create a remote, name it full PyPy, this is the name of the remote, and use this URL. And this is because it's just rooted at pypy.org and there's no additional filtering or anything, this would be a full mirror. And we created that. Like I said, we're not going to actually sync that because it would take a really long time. So why don't instead we create a second remote called allowed PyPy, and we're similarly pointing this to pypy.org, but this time we're going to say only include the shelf reader package and the Numpy package. And here you can see the output of that command and the includes that are here. So this is really where the filtering happens. And now let's use a package filter. Actually, let's update that remote. So you'll see the update portion of the commands here. This is the one that I just created. So this is how we specify what we're updating. And let's say we only want package types with the bdist wheel, and we want pre-releases false. We don't want any pre-releases. So let's go ahead and update that. And let's look at our remotes one more time. Now we had made two remotes. This is the big Python sync one. And then here's the one that we updated. You can see here, it's the one that has these filters on it, but now we're saying just bdist wheel and pre-releases, I think it's somewhere. Well, pre-release is false. There we go. So why don't we go ahead and do that sync? And so this is with not the full mirror, but the one that has bdist only and things like that. So it just synced down the content into Pulp, and we're going to create a publication. This is kind of that necessary step to create the metadata. I think this may make more sense when we actually browse the metadata, but publication is an important step. The latest version of Pulps can just auto-publish, so you don't actually have to do this step. But the version of the container I'm having is just one release back, and so I'm going to take this step manually. But in the future, you won't have to do this. In the very near future, actually. So I'm generating metadata around the packages in that repository version, so that the pip client can use that metadata to install packages with. Here's an example of that auto-publish option. I'm just showing you the example there. And then what we need to do is make this distribution live, and this is the thing that's going to be easier soon. But what we're saying is Pulp, Python, we're going to create a distribution. We're going to name this distribution myPyPy, and we're going to give it this base path. This is my-pypy, and this is the part of the URL that pip will end up fetching it from our Pulp server. And we're going to take a specific publication live, because that publication contains the content that we need. So in this terminal here is where I'll do this. And that's that same command. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this publication href here and make this live. If this is confusing, I can understand that. In the future, like in the next release of Pulp, just use the auto-publish option and you won't have to do any of this. So this is taking that synced content live. And so now pip and clients can interact with it, so that's great. So let's install Numpy from Pulp. And Numpy is probably already installed from my demo, so let's uninstall it first. Okay, we've uninstalled Numpy. And then we're going to pip install it, and you'll see that it's coming from my Pulp server. And look here, this is specifying the repository that I'm getting it from. So if you have more repositories with more distributions, you could expose them here and have different pip clients connect to different repositories. You could also have one repository exposed in multiple places. Let's go ahead and install this. Yay, it's installed. We can see that it's installed. Here's Numpy here. And you can configure pip to just pull straight from Pulp automatically and to let you run nice normal pip commands like that. And now let's browse the content. And here, this is the Docker stuff up here, but here's myPyPy. And this is the metadata that it was generating. This is what pip uses as a tool. And then if you were to continue in these links, you would find the actual binary data. I think maybe this will download. Yep, so here comes binary data. And this concludes the Python portion. Check over here. Okay, good. No audio issues. So next, I want to show the RPM demo. So let's create a repository. You'll notice this is all the same kind of a pattern, only it's with different content types. And that's what Pulp strives to do, is give one tool that can help manage content across a lot of different types for your organization. So we're going to create a repository called foo1. And we're going to create an on-demand remote. So this remote will say remote create. The name is going to be foo. It's going to be from this URL, which is a repository out in the world. This just happens to be a test repository, but it could just be as easily from CDN or from Apple or something like that. And then we're going to say policy on demand. So this says, don't bring in the actual binary data, just bring the information into Pulp, allow Pulp to present that to Yum and DNF clients as if all the information is here. And then if those clients actually request a package, Pulp will download it like a pull through cache and save it. So all we did was create the remote. We didn't actually perform any syncing. So why don't we go ahead and perform syncing? So we'll say repository sync. We're going to sync the name of the repository was foo1. We made this earlier. And the remote is foo. That's the one that we just made. Here goes the sync. And now we'll list the repository versions for repository foo1. And this is a little bit hard to see here, but it tells you like, oh, how many advisories did we bring in? 4, 35 packages, 1 package category, package group. These are all this, things specific to RPM content. One of the things that you can do, that I did want to show off though, is you can browse all this through the web interface if the CLI is looking a little bit cumbersome for you. Log in, admin password, and this is that same content basically here. And this is a really great way to just browse around Pulp and see what you have in here. So we have 1 repository, its latest version is here, so on and so forth. So with that, we'll create a second repository called foo2. We'll sync use that same remote to sync into that. This is demonstrating that one remote can sync content into multiple repositories. If you don't want to always specify the remote and the repository when you sync, you can create a relationship where this repository is just associated with a particular remote. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm saying, create me a repository, call it foo3, and associate it with this remote foo. And now that I've created this repository foo3, I can say just sync foo3, and it already knows which remote I want to use. This way you don't have to keep track of the remotes all the time. And we're going to now create a publication with foo1, so we're back working with repository foo1 here. This is that necessary step. Again, Pulp RPM is getting its auto-publish here very soon, and so this manual step I'm taking here will be going away. Once again, I'm going to create a distribution. It's going to be called distbar, and the base path here is some RPM content. So this is going to be in the path that yum-dnf clients use. And the publication is here that I just made. I made this publication, so let's take it live. Okay, now the content is live. And let's browse it. Some RPM content is here. You can see the metadata is here. This is actually on the server, but these packages are actually not on the server. They're presented like they are, but only when I go to fetch one are they actually being downloaded. So it's a very small package, so it downloads immediately. This is a streaming download, so it doesn't have to download all the data before it hands me any. So that is the RPM demo. And the last one I want to do is Ansible, and then we'll get right into questions and wrap this up if I haven't confused folks here. I'll just check on my sound. Okay, I'm seeing no issues. Seeing Brian Prophet say go. Thanks, Brian. The Ansible demo, we're going to create an Ansible repository using named myrepo. The Pulp Ansible plugin can manage both collections and roles. And it's that same feature set. It can sync, it can allow upload, it can let you organize that content into multiple repositories, and then use the Ansible Galaxy CLI to install those. So we just made myrepo. And this time we're going to use a requirements file. So this is a normal Ansible thing. So I'm going to sync collections. I'm going to sync down pulp_installer because we distribute our installer through ansible.galaxy.com, and also the ansible.posix collection as well. So just 2 collections to download. So I'm going to create a remote that uses this requirements file, Pulp Ansible remote of type collection, because there's collections and roles. We're going to create, I'm going to call it basic. It's going to sync from galaxy.ansible.com. You can also sync from cloud.redhat.com for certified Red Hat content. And there's a requirements file here. That's the one I just showed. So you can see the requirements file is parsed, and it says download these collections, the same data that you just saw. Now we're going to create an Ansible distribution for this repository. And the name of this distribution is called mydistro, and its base path is going to be foo. So this is going to be the part of the path that you see in the content map. And I'm distributing the repository that I made earlier, which is myrepo. So this is effectively taking the content of that repository live. But note, we haven't synced any content into it. And we can verify that if we go and we look at this content, and we'll see that there's no content into it. It shows us, basically an empty repository. And this is what the Ansible Galaxy would CLI would expect to use. So why don't we now sync it? So this is going to bring down those collections and make a new repository version. That repository version will be automatically distributed. You could configure it not to go live immediately, but in this case, because of the way I set it up, it will go live immediately. And done. So why don't we go back and we'll just browse this again. So I'm just going to hit reload on this page, and look, now you can see that there's two counts in here. One of them is the POSIX, Ansible.POSIX, and the other one is Pulp installer. So it's synced in the content correctly. And now we're going to install it with the Ansible Galaxy CLI. So this is just the normal Ansible Galaxy tool saying CLI, collection install, and I'm telling it to get its stuff from the Pulp server. I want to tell it to install my current working directory because it makes the demo easy. And the thing I want to install is pulp_installer. So we've now installed this. You can see the Ansible Galaxy CLI fetched this from Pulp. Look, it's installed. Hey, here's a tree listing. It's installed. Now let's look at a collection that I built locally. This one is from David Nussweiner, who does great work with the Galaxy stuff. And I want to upload this collection, which I have already downloaded here and built. This could be like a collection that you've built yourself, like private content that you don't want to share out through Ansible Galaxy. And I'm going to upload it to my repository. So Ansible Galaxy collection publish. Again, this is their CLI, not the Pulp CLI. I'm going to tell it the path to Pulp, but notice it includes this foo at the end. So I'm uploading to a specific repository. I could upload this to a different repository. It's all about this path, and this matches the distribution that we have configured that we made earlier. And I'm going to give it the Nussweiner D collection. So let's go ahead and upload that. Now you'll see an error, and this is a bug, because if we actually browse the collection, you'll see that it was uploaded correctly. So now the count is at 3. You can see the Nussweiner D collection here. So we've just uploaded the content. There's a bug filed for that. We're going to fix it. So now let's go through role content, and that's going to be the end of the demos. So we're going to make a remote for role content. And the thing you should know about this is you can give it lots of these different parameters. And so like I'm saying, get this from galaxy.ansible.com. And I'm filtering with the namespace name Elastic. So the Ansible Galaxy API allows you to do all this filtering. If I didn't have anything here, I would literally be mirroring Galaxy. But by doing this, I'm saying just bring in a subset. So this is kind of like a filtering syntax. And I can put this onto the remote here. So I'll make this remote. And this URL is what's kind of providing the package filtering here. So then I'll sync in the roles into my repo with the remote that I just made. And now we'll browse it. So you can see this is that in that Galaxy foo. So notice it's in this particular repository. And this is the V1 roles part of the Galaxy API. And look, you can see the Pulp synced in these two particular roles. You can configure the CLI more permanently if you just put a line like this into your ansible.cfg. Then you can use a simpler install command. You can just say, give me this. This is more like what users are more accustomed to when they don't have to specify where to get stuff from, because it just comes from galaxy.ansible.com. And now you can also copy content between repositories. I haven't gotten into any of that, and I'm not going to now. There's a whole bunch of docs out there in each of the plugins about how you can copy content between repositories. That wraps up my demo, and I'm going to take it back here. Brian, I think now would be an okay time for questions.
Okay, thank you, Brian. So while we're getting Brian,
yes, I can't hear you.
Yeah, we know. So while you're getting set up, We're going to throw
Yeah,
the
so
questions.
this demo, which I'll put a link here, has like a whole bunch of content in it. Here's a getting help slide that I wanted to show you. And the last one has contact information for me, but I think getting help is more important than that. So I will leave this up here and switch back for any questions. And yes, I am an EE hobbyist. So let's check my phone.
Okay, so while Brian is getting set, I've invited Grant Gainey, who's been answering some questions in chat, to come on and answer some of the questions. We may
great.
have a solution for Brian in just a second. So in the meantime, first question is going to be, can Pulp replace Nexus or Artifactory? If so, what are some of the reasons that one should choose Pulp over the others? So Grant, can you take that?
I can. Can you all hear me? This is the first time I've had my mic live here.
Yes.
Outstanding. I can take that by saying I do not have an answer to that, but I know that Brian may be able to answer it better. So when he gets his audio on, let's re-ask that one of Brian. I just don't want to lie to people on a recorded meeting.
Understood. So what about the next question, Grant? What kind of auth-in or auth-z does Pulp support? Can I integrate? Yeah, go ahead.
As it turns out, I was talking with someone this morning about authentication in a Pulp instance. I happen to have and I'll drop it into chat here, the documentation for Pulp 3's authentication processes. Basically, it's a Django app, so any of the authentication that Django supports, you can set up. You can set up mod LDAP. We have typically people talk to it in a development environment using just basic auth. In the various production products that use Pulp, which include Satellite and Rui right now, and the Ansible folks are using it as well. It uses certificate-based auth, but there's a lot of options there because it's a Django app. When it comes, that's for authentication. For authorization, Brian mentioned there's role-based access control is being implemented. We have a ways to go on that in Pulp 3, but it's in basics are in place for a number of plugins right now, like Pulp Container, and that will be expanding to the rest of the plugins real soon now, he said in quotes, so that you will be able to authorize individual entities with individual people or with groups with whatever your authorization system is. There's a lot of work happening right now on the authentication and authorization front in Pulp 3. Hopefully that answers that question.
I think Brian can hear me now. Brian, can you hear me? Okay, he's nodding, so we're good.
Outstanding.
All right, you might want to turn your screen sharing off, Brian, too, so we can see you better. And then I will re-ask the next question. Grant, thank you so much. So the question that we asked before was, can Pulp replace Nexus or Artifactory? If so, what are some of the reasons that one should choose Pulp over the others?
Yeah, that's a great question. That is, part of our goal is to make a software that competes with those. Pulp is unique relative to them because it's fully open source versus an open core model like Artifactory has. And also relative to Nexus, we try to provide a solution that can cover many more content types instead of the content types that Nexus is limited by. They're both great software projects, but we want to make sure that there is an open source default which can ensure that these use cases are available for as many folks and environments as possible. One of our goals is to create some media that shows you how to easily switch from Artifactory, for example, to Pulp, and from Nexus to Pulp.
Okay. Our next question is going to be, is there a breakdown of the performance improvements, for example, around synchronization and publish?
There is, and I will get a link to it, which I'm doing right now, but we published kind of a report of how we assessed the performance improvements, and I will share that in the chat here in a moment.
All right, so next question comes in, and is there going to be any documentation or exposed API for controlling the container pull-through caching, or a document that features at all like outside of the REST API docs? If a client fetches CC latest, when does Pulp check for a new latest, for example? How do I invalidate a cached image? So there's a lot there.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I'm not going to give as great answers because I don't actually work specifically on that plugin. But I believe that Pulp will serve the content that it already has. And in terms of, you know, if Pulp already has a notion of latest, I believe that it will serve that. And you would have to trigger a Pulp operation to have latest be checked again. But I'm only 70% sure on that because I don't work day to day with that plugin, just to be plain about it. If there's something specific that we can do to help make media that explains this portion of our feature set more than just documentation, that's a goal that we have. So please let us know either through Pulp list, which is our mailing list, or through chat #Pulp in Freenode, at least for the foreseeable future. Sorry, I don't have a better answer for you.
Thank you very much. And we have time for one more question, which is, my understanding is that the symlinks in Pulp 2 that related the RPM content in a distribution to the units on disk are going away in Pulp 3. How are those relationships maintained in Pulp 3?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the record of what was published in Pulp 2 were these symlinks. And in Pulp 3, those records are stored inside the database. This is how we can store not only just one copy, like the latest thing that's published, but also all the previous repository versions prior to that. So we had to move that into the database. And then the content app, which is one of the Pulp processes that serves content, is able to take the user's request, look in the database, and work with the distribution that's configured, and then serve that content. Some users still want more control, or for performance reasons would prefer to have symlinks. And we do have an area of our feature set that I didn't talk about called file system exporters. And you are able to export content on disk. And we could make a file system exporter that exports symlinks. And in fact, we've talked about doing just that. Some people like the way that it worked before, and we don't want to take that away. At the same time, we had to move away from it as a default, these symlinks, because there's so much content that ends up in Pulp systems that file systems would literally run out of inode. And this was a really painful problem because we had no recourse. So it's in the database, and we want to make it possible to bring the symlinks back if that's helpful.
Okay, great. Well, that concludes our questions for this episode of Community Central. Brian, thank you so much for giving us a great presentation and soldiering through the technical difficulties. Also, thanks to our impromptu guest, Grant Gainey, for filling in on the questions. We certainly appreciate his help as well. And thanks all to your patience. That concludes another edition of Community Central. Thanks for joining in. Thanks for the great questions. Tune in next week where we're going to have another look at upstream communities in the open source ecosystem. Until then, have a great and safe day.